Some guided questions that I would like us to discuss. Of course, if anybody has any questions or contributions after that, you can please come in. But we just want to dig a bit deeper into what we've introduced. So please, if you want to speak, you can just write stack in the chat. Not sure you can raise your hand in Google Meet, but and we'll operate under a progressive stack and moderator discretion. We like to give often those who might not be so strong in speaking a chance at times, if necessary. And just note that there's no teacher here. We're all here to learn from each other. So, and we want to share this. Like I said, why we are recording it is to share for others to be able to benefit from this. So please encourage everyone to try and participate. So moving on, I want to ask, what does Africans' political maturity imply about their political history? We've seen that Africans had a strong political maturity. What does that imply about their economic history?
Yeah. Can Conrad hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I would say that reading Nkrumah's insight about how African economy was structured before colonialism, you could tell that it is a colonialistic type of economy that has kind of how am I going to put it now? A kind of a check and balance system where people or individuals were not allowed to do as they like. For example, the chiefs. There are people who checkmate the chiefs and make sure that they don't act independently and as they like. So it shows that Africa's political maturity resembled that of communism, where land, for example, were collectively owned, and my baby
is have a little comrade there.
Maybe she's trying to speak to.
Speak. Just don't know if anybody else has indicated to speak. If not, I would go back again. When Rodney explains this in terms of a base influencing a superstructure. So the idea here is that you couldn't have that level of political maturity if you were not developed, if you were not economically capable, which is what a lot of our people have come to believe, that Africa was inferior, and that is why Africa was colonized. And this is the point, that Africa had iron smelting before Europeans. Africa had superior technology in many respects. In how Europe underdeveloped Africa, Rodney speaks of copper. That was, is it copper? Yeah, that was superior to what you find elsewhere. And there are many other examples like that. So I think what we're trying to draw out of this is the level of economic development, because it was obvious that this was a well-advanced political system that was being practiced, as we saw again with the Mandate Charter, and so on. So yeah, just moving on. I think this question has also sort of been addressed in terms of what economic systems, we talked about communalism. Does anybody else see, in terms of, we spoke of a mix of things, an uneven development. Was there a diversity of systems, and what characteristics were common across Africa? Does anybody want to comment on that?
If I may.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Greetings, everybody. Greetings.
Greetings,
So
Kwame.
in regards
Welcome.
to economic systems, but a number of them, but as you said, the most common one or the more common one was communalism. There are instances where we did see feudal economic modes of productions in African societies. In the Abyssinian Empire, the Ethiopian Empire, that was pretty much a feudal system. We also saw feudalism in the now it's a combination of Angola and the DRC. We saw feudalism in the ancient Congo Kingdom. But even though we saw a number of economic systems in Africa, for the most part, we did have that sense of a strong communal base, and a lot of times the communal based systems took precedence in the economics and the transfer of resources in the kind of Africa. And specifically in chapter 1 of Class Struggle in Africa, Nkrumah, she gets into that, how land was more or less communally owned by the people. Like it says under communalism, for example, this is page 13, by the way, if everybody's reading or running along. It says under communalism. Can I shift it under communalism?
I think you.
There was people's ownership, and so therefore there was a common ownership. And labor was the need and habit of all, meaning that all who lived on the ability to labor, they was also therefore themselves, we stood that the reflection of an individual has to be a reflection of the society that the individual comes from, and it's very opposed to what we currently understand. Whereas, like you see, few individuals a gross amount of wealth, and then you look at the overall majority, whether level of society you're talking about, whether it's a Nigerian question, a ruling question, or what have you, it's like it's completely flawed. Instead, the individual isn't a representation of the society in question. The individual is a representation of the gross exploitation that most people in society is subjected to. So, for the most part, to double back to the question, like we did see multiple modes of production. We saw communalism, we saw feudalism, and whatnot. But for the most part, we really saw a very communal-based economic mode of production. The priority of societies in pre-colonial Africa is really predicated on if the community survived or not, and how they survived as a collective. I'll yield there.
So, what factors drove the creation of the African petty bourgeois and bourgeois classes? Anyone want to comment on that? This is discussed, in the chapter, and talked about it earlier in the presentation. Can anybody distill it?
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
What Nkrumah actually explained in the book, the creation of the typical African bourgeoisie, African petty bourgeoisie. During the colonial time, the colonialists never had that enough to be able to run colonial administrative, and bringing people down from Europe to Africa was actually costing them more. So the solutions to this was able to educate people, and what they did was actually see the class of people that aligned with their own capitalistic interests, who were the feudal class, the kings, some part of Africa that's kings, things like that, and the warren chiefs. So those were the people that were being given colonial education, kids and things like that. They were being given the colonial education. So they went to places like Cambridge, Oxford, came back, and they were already being acclimated to the way of the West. So when they came back, they were actually thinking like the West. And prior to the agitation against anti-colonial struggle, the peasantry and the farmers and the workers, the unions, we were fighting against collapse of the colonial system. And part of the petty bourgeoisie, it was already being created by the colonialists. Also, in alliance, with the peasantry to be able to revolt, the colonial system. But the social class, that comes into play, fighting that colonial system, they both have diverse interests. For the peasantry and the farmers, and the workers, their interest, was to collapse the capitalist system and the exploitative system. But the so-called petty bourgeoisie, were actually fighting, the system in the context of racism, because they realized that they were not actually, getting more paid. Sometimes they might be in the same position with the white man, and the white man will actually earn more than them, and they may actually have more qualifications than the white man, but based on the context of race, they were being alienated to receive higher payment. And for them, the solution was to be able to take over the system, on the basis of indigenization, to start exploiting people and things like that. But they never cared about the capitalist relationship that was exploiting people. So when the colonial struggle, the colonial struggle, were reaching the point whereby it was disrupting the economic base of the colonialism in Africa, then the so-called colonialists looked among petty bourgeoisie. They could call up to the table and negotiate, and they gave them independence, and that is how the petty bourgeoisie came into creation of taking the political space in Africa in general. So that's my contribution.
Thank you. Somebody else want to come in on this?
Yes, I'd like to speak briefly again on this question. This is a very good question. So Nkrumah touches on how the lines, the class lines and the class stratifications were pretty much blurred in the first chapter. So initially, during the colonial period, the colonizers were the primary antagonists, and they were the primary contradiction. The colonization was the primary contradiction of the African proletariat, the African peasantry, and so on and so forth faced. So naturally, their energy was focused towards them. So while this was going on, there was kind of a blinding factor, and Nkrumah gets further into this in later chapters about how the class struggle was there's an obfuscation. It made it seem like all the Africans, regardless of their class position, were in alliance to, working towards this anti-imperialist goal. As it turned out, while focusing all of the energy on the colonizers, we didn't really look towards who would be the competitors to the colonizers. We didn't look towards the petty bourgeoisie and how they we didn't look towards the indigenous African bourgeoisie, as Nkrumah refers to them. So how that happened is all of our energy was diverted towards the pretty obvious class enemy. And then we didn't recognize that there are class enemies amongst ourselves that look like us, that spoke the same languages as us, that are part of the same nation as us, so on and so forth. So that's pretty much another explanation as to how these petty bourgeois and indigenous bourgeoisie pretty much got propped up. There was less attention on them and more attention on the obvious imperialist and colonial, so on and so forth. I will yield there.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great point to make, because I think we still often can fall into certain traps in the sense of not focusing on our real enemy and thinking of our real problems, and in a sense we have this instance now under colonialism that the colonialist was the enemy, and not really looking at those who colonialism had set up, prepared for its own exit, so that these people will continue. I always find it intriguing how Nkrumah discusses indirect rule, the use of indirect rule, to signify that we are still under a process of indirect rule today, and it's all part of a system. So, and that system again, key here now, returning, because what colonialism does is come in to want to take your resources, and when it does that, it needs local people to assist that process. So it needs political elite. It needs trade. People down in the crop supply chain, and various others. Intellectuals who would talk about the West being good and better than and degrade their own people, and it's all part of that system of exploitation, of taking out, which is why, if you don't look at it today, we talk about corruption, for example, and not understand that corruption is ingrained in this kind of system. It's a system of making a cut. It's not a system of producing. It's a system of making a cut on a quick sale, on how much percent can you get, and if you can get in well with the elites, you can grease a few, and it drives corruption. So we do always, in looking at things, fail to look at the kind of system, the economic system that operates, and how that is at the root of our problems. Does anybody else want to comment on this? And please, people should feel free. There's quite a few people here who haven't spoken. Feel free if you have questions as well. Nothing's clear. Do come in. But I think covered this a bit. So we talk about the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. So now, how did colonialism create the African proletariat, and specifically, who today are the African proletariat? I think this is an important question. I would like someone to have a go at it.
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
On the question of who are the African proletariat, before I could go on that context of African proletariat, you have to understand that in every capitalist society, there are class distinctions who are the so-called bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And before you can have that dissection or that class division in a society, this society must be an industrialized-based society. So majority of those who are classified as proletarians are those who actually work within, the factories, who how I say it, give their labor, be exploited, under normality, So, like we said, in Africa, we have things like that as well, because Africa was really, was under class division of the capitalist system. But in Africa, we found ourselves in that position whereby we don't really have much industries. So, majority of our industries has already collapsed, and as of today, those I can probably say can be classified as, the African proletariat are those in the corporate sector, actually giving out, their services, services in the private sector, in the servicing industry, like we have in Nigeria today. Those in the banks, those in working or in ministries and things like that. Because we realize that in Africa, we have less more of industries. So majority of our Africans are probably peasantries, those who live in the countryside or in the rural areas, and so we have a little bit of the African proletariat in the sense of checking the class distinction in the capitalist society. So that's my contribution. Does anybody want to add into the discussion, please? let me say furthermore, in able to also give references to what African collaterals actually means. In the right sense of, of the economic structure in Nigeria today, we realize that majority of the system, only takes in few people, and like we said, those in offices in political space in Africa today are just intermediaries, you know, within the capitalist system, whereby they go to create that organization, in terms of creating the workforce to produce certain raw materials needed, to be exported into the so-called bourgeoisie countries, and one way or the other, that's only create is a tiny fraction of the proletariat class, and hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's only creates a tiny class. That means a tiny amount of the African bourgeoisie, because we don't really have much of industries, and the industries we have today, that are actually producing things. In Nigeria, as of today, we have the mining industry, the multinational oil companies as of today, which able as able to employ maybe few thousands of people, and not on a normal larger scale that we see in most capitalist countries, whereby the bunch sections of the working class, are planterans, whereby they work in industries. So we don't actually have that. So we have just a tiny fraction of the African proletariat. So majority of people we have in Africa today are basically peasantries. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if nobody else is coming in, simply the creation of the proletariat was by taking away the land from the people. And as explained earlier, we had in Europe serfs who were ready made to be proletariats, but in the system we had under the communalism, there was really nothing like that. So it was necessary to steal the land from the people, make them destitute, while a few were going to grease the machine and become the petty bourgeois and the bourgeoisie. And so today, under neo-colonialism, is why we ask who today are the African proletariat, and that answer you gave at the was quite good. And when we look at the system of colonialism and it's extractive, there are no large-scale industries, so we don't have the proletariat in the sense in which you do in like the West or industrial countries. But we have a mass of people who have no choice of survival but to sell their labor power, and their labor power is determined, the price of it, the value of it is determined by someone else. The price also of the resources that they dig out of the ground is determined external to them. Their value, the value is reduced from its actual value, both the resources and the people needed to move those resources. And where there is nothing about resources, then the people are left to be destitute. And that is and it's very important. I always say, in understanding, we have to always understand our context, because you have a lot of people on the left talk about this proletariat data and realize some things that we don't have that kind of industrial proletariat large scale. We have but we do have a lot of people who work on the land, peasants, informal economy, who don't belong to, for example, trade unions, and so on. And we do also have trade unions, and we have industrial working class, we have urban working class, and so on. This question is going to be, there's a chapter dedicated to it in the book, so it will be something we will come to again later when we come to that chapter. Now, next question. Nkrumah says obsolete forms of social relations were preserved or restored by colonialism. What do people think Nkrumah means by this? Can you give any examples? Does anybody want to come in?
I think someone said patriarchy. Comrade Emma, can you come and just give us a proper explanation about that?
Or maybe Emma doesn't want to speak. You put it in the, was it in the chat?
Comrade Emma said that they weren't able to speak.
Okay, so that's great, but I think that's a very great answer. Patriarchy, right? I think it's a very, very good answer. And I don't know if anybody else wants to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to mention, I don't know if you or Nkrumah gave specific examples of like Warren Chiefs in Igbo land who were set up just to have a traditional administration under colonialism. But there are also other feudal relations that were strengthened by colonialism for the reason to also administer the colonies. And then getting to patriarchy, one of the things that the Europeans also imposed was social practices on Africa. And that includes the gender binaries and the gender dynamics. So, as Emma also points out, that the family structure or familial relations, being head of the family's finances. But I'll also say that, at least in Igbo land, and I think this is common elsewhere, there were multiple government structures, including government structures that were strictly femme-controlled. So people who identify as women, they had a complete independent government structure that also took into account decisions and could give women identified people power and influence in society. And one of the things colonialism did was to destroy like those women led institutions while building up the male institutions.
Yeah, thank you. That's great, and we see that clearly. And you can, for example, what I pointed out from the Mandate Charter, how the question of how women were seen to be important in terms of the political system, and you saw that all over Africa. In terms of gender binaries, it's the same thing. For example, in the north of Nigeria today now, we have issues with being able to it's across Nigeria, but in the north, with Islam coming in, there was a lot of degrading of even gender binary practices were there in Hausa land, spirituality, and I would also add that feudal, like it's all part of patriarchy, but feudalism, because feudalism is a traditionally a very patriotic system, right? And it's a system that that puts the male at the head of everything. The male inherits everything, and where we went even we'd gone beyond. We weren't having feudalism. We now, even as it became a capitalist system, it works. Some people even still refer to Nigeria as a feudalist state, parts of Nigeria, and it can be quite. So you have this capitalism mixed in with feudalism, because you have these feudal lords who determine things. There's a system of prebendalism. There are people who influence others by using money, by using their. It's like they have serfs under them. You have then you have absolute rule from even though the monarchs don't have direct political power, but they have kind of rule now where these kind of checks and balances that were there are not there. And the monarchs control a lot of land, and they use that to control people. And there's hardly any checks on them. So there are a lot of instances of that. It's I think that people don't get how we were made to move so far backwards from what we were by colonialism. Does anybody else want to come in? Okay. Thanks, comrades, for that. Those great answers. Next question: what is wrong with relying on cash crop economies? Some people don't think it's wrong, and, even though Nkrumah explains that, but you hear people talk about the days in which Nigeria used to export cocoa and use cocoa to do this, and if we can only work on our cocoa production, because we stopped relying on cocoa, we now rely on oil, crude oil. So we used to export cocoa, rubber, palm oil. Even now, I hear that Ghana is is the biggest exporter of yams, and I always laugh. Yams. So what is wrong with that? Does anybody want to come in?
I think I should just speak on that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, but on the issue of of production, or how I say it, growing of cash crops, as commodity for the exporting market. I feel like one way or the other, it is able to create a crisis which we are actually facing presently now in Nigeria. On the question of food or deficits that we have in Nigeria presently, because over time, when the colonialists came, we were able to change how we plant things, or things we should be planted on our farms. Food were not given power. It was about the cash crops. Which was able to make money, and it has that today you see the crisis of Russia and Ukraine, whereby the supply, or let's say the price of bread is increasing in most African countries, and the reason so is just that haven't we have enough land to plant the grains that can be made into wheat or things like that, but we realize that global capitalism is able to mandate some specific African countries of what they should be exporting. Our lands are fertile enough to plant wheat or things like that. But the structure, or the capitalist structure in general, just keep it mandatory that you must do some certain things. So even away from the agrarian economy, as of today, which is still widely practiced in the world, but some African so-called independent African colonies of today, follow the path of whatever the West tells them. As in Nigeria today, we're able to collapse our Nigerian economy into oil production, and that has able to make Africa or Nigeria, be dependent, for the importation of food. So we have enough vast land, and we don't have food. And prior to the military regime, they were able to create some policies which is the advent of the involvement of neoliberalism in agricultural sector. Land was strictly taken from communal use, and it was being given to agencies which were working under IMF and the World Bank, and those they take lands from those that own land, and those people become laborers in their land they own. And so those people does not have that ability, or let me say, have that free will, to plant whatever they needed for their own survival. They only plant things according to what the IMF is saying, or according to what the African Development Bank is saying today. And that is one of the crises we are actually facing in Africa, because we're so dependent, on global market, on what the global market, is demanding from us. As of today, Iran has been able to export, tons of tubers of yam, to the global market in general. Or as of today, the price of yam in Nigeria, is so high that the ordinary man cannot even afford it. So it has become, a thing of class. There's a class distinction there. Some certain African food cannot be bought, and then, like we found in the day, whereby some certain food, are highly consumed, or are highly demanded because the colonial system has able to structure up to the extent that it has moved us away, thinking of how we can be able to consider food, like indeed now, the rise of demand of rice. It's so much. People depend on rice. People are not actually looking towards cultivating into other food. Maybe thinking of consuming vegetables or things like that, because it has become an high commodity, and it's affecting the malnutrition level. In Nigeria, we first say, so colonialism always has problem. There's this problem. So this is like an eye opener that privatization will not solve any social problems that we found ourselves in. So it is only for the few to make things and treat everything as commodity. It's become a commodity now. Food has become a commodity, which was not meant to be so. So that is my contribution.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's I think someone wants to come in.
Yeah, I just add that cash crops. For one thing, initially when you do that, you're not even processing the crops, you're just harvesting them and then shipping them out. And so that means that in one sense, then you're still completely under the forces of the international markets, who often can collude to set the price of these crops you're exporting. And yeah, and as Comrade Emma added, cash crops, it's still extractive. The other thing is that I was thinking is that oftentimes these doing monocropping is actually very devastating to the environment. And so often countries who are in who base economies on cash crops, they're destroying their environment due to monocropping practices. They rely on exports, which means that they're still basically positioning themselves as a satellite to the international economy.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Essentially, yes, there's a lot wrong with it, and as you say, even coming into things that we may not have thought about in the past about cash crops, the damage to the environment, the damage to the land, what we are facing today. It's and you see, for example, in places that the natural wildlife has been eradicated, things like that, and crucially, as you say, in terms of the international system that we are forced to rely on, and that this is, for me, it's key that colonialism. Nkrumah was talking about it in terms of what it was doing under colonialism, right? It was the cash crop economy that created this exploitative system, that created the exploiters, the petty bourgeoisie to exploit and to make people lose their livelihoods, and have to become workers. And so that if under new colonialism we're practicing that, we enable a whole exploitative system to persist, and you don't just put cash crops on the ground. It requires, as Nkrumah says, it requires the injection of foreign capital, which is used to control. Local or foreign capital will control cash crops. It's not going to be something that people are going to do, are able to do communally, and you do it for profit to send. You create a whole series of intermediaries. A lot of people, lose out. There's a lot of corruption in the system, whether cash crops or even other resources like crude oil. It's what is that's the inevitable result of that kind of system. And crucially, as you say, we wouldn't be producing things with the crops in any case that make us independent. Yeah. So there's no way we could get out of our conditions unless we industrialize, really, which can only be possible in any case with socialism. Sorry, moving on. The colonialists built infrastructure, they say. I think illustrated that earlier. Why didn't that benefit Africans post-colonialism? And why is it not possible for us to build the necessary infrastructures to industrialize today? This is a big question, I know, but I will be sort of limited on time. But does anybody want to come in on this? So I just want to apologize that I haven't been looking at the chat, so I've just now seen some great points from Emma. So taking away land from people to grow their food, creating landlessness. Cash crop is capital intensive. Only huge monopolies can manage it. Yeah, it's an extractive economy and highly dependent on foreign reserves and exchange rates. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, thanks Obioma. All the infrastructure was built to increase the level of exploitation of the colonies. Exactly. That infrastructure was primarily to facilitate resource extraction. Thank you, Abdul. That's it. So yes, it was done to do that. So that why is it impossible now to industrialize? We've had some challenges, to industrialize. Everybody knows, or they say they know. Our politicians, for example, say we want to move away from consumption to production, and I've explained to people several times that what does that mean? They talk about producing rice locally so they don't have to import rice. Whereas rice requires capital, requires machinery, requires water, it requires industrialization to be able to do it well. And so, for example, because the presidential candidate is always shouting about we will go to we want to move to production away from consumption, but he's highly neoliberal in his thinking and does not believe in state intervention on these questions. Believes in privatizing everything, which again is going to mean that industrialization will be impossible. And I was reading something recently where someone spoke about the industrialization of China coming about because of the socialist policies of Mao. It would have been impossible without that. Yeah. So Obiama says we still often need large amounts of capital to build industries. but also political determinism to stand against the West and large multinational countries, corporations. Yeah, the system of imperialism means it's impossible to industrialize under this system unless we take steps to industrialize. I was speaking yesterday to someone about how the West has always refused to allow us to industrialize. It is a deliberate policy. Where capital comes in, it is directed towards things that are frivolous and do not move towards industrialization. Where the countries try to industrialize and ask for capital, they are denied them. And so, for example, we have something called the Ajaokuta steel mill in Nigeria, which was key to industrializing. And guess who built it? It was the Russians. It's not an accident that it was Russians who Nigeria did not have an original relationship with that came in to build the steel mill. But after the Russians built it, the government still refused to allow it to function. And it doesn't function. It's dead. Essentially, our leaders operating with their puppet masters have a deliberate policy to try and focus on other things, to diminish education that you need for industrialization, to diminish healthcare, and focus on the resources that they send, where they make a lot of benefits from, where they benefit from the corruption in the system. So again, someone as Abdul Basit says, to my understanding, we have a designated consumption role by European capitalism. Merely building our own industries will undermine the competitiveness of Western goods in our markets. Yeah. And Emma says any development and industrialization and increase in living standards of Africa is bad for the West because it takes away the cheap commodities they can get. So, and Obioma says our role in imperialism is to extract raw materials and buy finished goods. Right, so that's why we don't have railways today. That's why we don't have good roads. Even the where you have them, like for example, the government talks about building ports, and there's all this thing about building ports, which was always the case. Ports and roads to the ports, railways to the ports. Yeah, of course, though, over time we even lost the railways to the ports. But when you get a railway, it's to, for example, I heard Seun Kuti talking yesterday about why we get certain things in this country, like telecoms. It's just to keep the machine going. It's just to benefit those the elites from something they would like to use. So they build a railway from Abuja to Kaduna because it benefits them. But they don't build a whole system integrated that can allow for independence. And unless we remove them and have a radical socialist government, we will never ever industrialize. So,
in I just want to say, since you have to understand that the program of people who are bankrupt for ideas, very on, we've actually said, years of the root to colonial power, idea created from that class of what I call it, business-minded folks, who are either leaders of the corporate world and things like that. And so we do not really think towards industrial country, their own notions, their own thinking to do things that the communist capitalist, markets. And as the position of Nigeria, in the global capitalist markets today, is to produce, certain raw materials or natural resources that complement the economy of the West.
So even the so-called leaders, you have to know their stance, know their political stance and economic stance that they can never, one way or the other, overrode, the plans of their peers, their puppets. And like we said, before we got into, we have in this country, we realized that, their economic base, is the structure of the state because they themselves, use the structure of the state, to enrich themselves, to create all kinds of capitals, that we see, to extract money. So the most of the economy or the way the government makes money in the country is to keep taxing, the masses. So if they can able to get more money from that, so industrialization does not mean anything to them because for them is to make more money, more money to exploit the people. So they don't actually take towards that initiative that will be beneficiary, to the majority of the people, social services, things like that. So it's just the mindset of all these so-called neoliberal and capitalist minded people. They never had an independence fund of their own, how they were able to industrialize the country. And moving towards industrialization means to have an issue with the West, which they don't want, which they don't like. And that's the only way why capitalism can be able to come. So in colonies in Africa or in so-called dependent countries that we have today, it's for the mass of the people to step in the streets, to able to change, the government ideology of today towards industrialization. The capitalist African capitalist can never be, they can only be in satellite countries, capitalist country or matrix or the labor or related from the capitalist economy. So the issue today is president leaders, political leaders, and thinking towards industrialization because they have a position of back at the state. Like
Thank you very much. Yeah, just finally, I just add because this ties into the question of debt. Um, we constantly talk about it's constantly talked about in the context of imperialism. Because for one thing, Nkrumah notes in neocolonialism that we do need foreign capital, but that what neocolonialism is the use of foreign capital to continue our exploitation. Foreign capital is not going to come in to help us to develop. And there's a very good article I enjoyed called How Imperialism Fuels Your Car. And it really goes into detail how where does the foreign capital go to. And in the case of Nigeria, the foreign capital goes into the extractive area. And we speak about China, and we don't want to get into a debate because we often have debates about China. But the article notes that the Chinese have focused more of their investment has gone into helping out countries to diversify, not just African countries, of course, to build infrastructure. And there's this big, a lot of noise made against the Chinese, foiled by the Americans who coined the phrase debt-trapped diplomacy. And I'm not trying to imply in any way, I don't want to get into the debate about whether or not China is imperialist, just status of facts, that this is what illustrates the imperialist system. It's to not use capital to help to ensure countries can develop and be independent and industrialized. So just move on because we are going. Okay, thanks a lot, Obioma. Thanks for the great contributions and thanks for coming. We'll soon be finishing. Thank you. How many more questions do I have? Okay, just one more question. The leadership class left by imperialism. Yes, Emma, it's called How Imperialism Fuels Your Car. Something like that. Yes, something like that. How imperialism fuels your car or neocolonialism fuels your car. I'm not sure the exact words. I will check and let you know. So, in the meantime, the leadership class left by imperialism, how and why were they influenced to be pro-West and pro-imperialist? Yeah, that's it. Neo-colonialism fueling car, yes. Yeah. Yeah. The leadership class left by imperialism, how and why were they influenced to be pro-West and pro-imperialist? As explained by Nkrumah, or if you have thoughts beyond, the time of Nkrumah. Anyone want to come in?
I think this, is just to complement on what you said. That, the capital, the capital flight coming in Africa is actually made to be projected into the extracting industry, then be able to start, raw materials. And this so-called political class that we have, understand that fact, and they rather choose, to where the money is coming from. So they one way or the other they are pro-West because those are the people that fund, their government and things like that. And this is one of the reasons, we have issues, why I would say the socialist policies one way or the other, was collapsing in countries like Tanzania, so Ghana, because majority of their plans or majority of their paths towards development were being aimed, on the capital coming from a police country. So if actually you are having a plan of development, and the resources you need to develop your country to become, a big competitor, in the global space is coming from the opposite side. You never expected them to play their role. This is one of the reasons, I think it was being ironed out, at the United Nations, whereby whenever, there is an agreement, able to develop Africa, when Africa will be facing, the crisis of of um, of poverty, and things like that. And also, there have been some statistics, stated by some agencies on UNICEF and things like that. The rise of poverty, the rise of killings and things in Africa. But West, which the majority of the bulk of the resources needed, to change those things, are not actually giving out the money. So this is where the problem is. Like for the Africa to develop, you have to look, away from the capitalist economy, whereby we can start thinking about we can to develop our own economy from our capacity, for what we have, for what we can produce. I'll be thinking about we can use that big cheap, quick easy money to come in, quick easy money, quite easy for them to police class, to embezzle put it in their private pockets and things like that. So that's one contribution.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I think, Nkrumah explains, how that, is that process. And we've talked about indirect rule, we have talked about the creation of chiefs, we've talked about the whole system of extraction of cash crops. We talk about, Nkrumah talks about how they were educated. They are educated in the West. Actually, I want to see if we can just pull out that quote again. Yes. We had a police and army that were largely trained in the West. We had an intelligentsia indoctrinated with Western values. We had people who were seeing the benefits for themselves for serving the imperialists, and this is how imperialism has always functioned from the time of Rome. So basically, a lot of people don't understand this. There's a lot of discussion about imperialism. Like again, if I refer to debt and stuff like that, it's much more deeper than that, and it's much more the fact that the leadership class sees its own interest as serving imperialism, and it will always see its own interests as saving it, and which is why they send their children to be educated in the West. Till today, they go to the West for holidays, they buy houses there, and you know, and yes, anybody who tries to buckle the system, like Nkrumah or Sankara, will be assassinated, or be dealt with, or be removed. Or there was an article today. I Those who are members of MA, I shared it in the group about what happened to Odinga of Kenya, who after the independence of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta saw himself as being aligned to the West, but Odinga was elected as the vice president, and immediately the imperialists started to, in this case the British, did everything possible to remove Odinga, who was a Pan-Africanist, who was a socialist, did dirty tricks, smeared him, tried to claim that he was planning a coup and things like that. He was removed, and incidentally, his son is standing to be Kenya's president today, but his son is now more of the pro-West kind of leader, unfortunately. So with that, I think we are at the end. If anybody has any comments, questions, anything they want to state, please you can come in. Thank you so much for those of you who have come. I appreciated your contributions. There were a lot of great contributions here. I was actually quite delighted to see them, and just please be aware, and like I said, the reason we were recording is we want this thing to we can have these discussions, but we want to find ways in which they reach people who are not aware of these things. So we try to use social media and try to share these things. We're also going to be sharing a short video that doesn't include the discussions here at all, just a short summary of chapter 1, which can be shared more widely, shorter things get more traction, maybe to try and incite interest, from people to get them reading these books, to get them finding out more, maybe to follow the longer discussion we've had. We're going to continue with chapter 2 very soon, hopefully, because we have a lot of activities on ground here, so